Stay at home and out of the weather kind of day, but it's cleared up here this afternoon. We got time to come to church, so we didn't have to get wet making it here. It's good to see everybody that made it. Ben is in Tupelo tonight, speaking at the summer series, so I'm filling in for him tonight. Last week he was in Maywood, but tonight he is over in Tupelo, something he'd already had scheduled, so he'd asked me if I'd come back another time, so I'm happy to do that for him when we can. It's they say wide people should not wear stripes, but I'm wearing them tonight anyway. So it serves two purposes. So y'all can tell if they're running this way, I'm still standing upright. If they run up and down, I fell over, so it can pop me back up. So besides fashion, they have a purpose for the night. So. Last week we talked about Daniel. Tonight we want to talk about Ezekiel, and next one in our series, and look at a few things about Ezekiel. Who was he? When did he live and where, and what was his purpose? It's our biggest thing. And then also, maybe just as important, what can we learn from what his life and what happened with him that we can apply to us, that can be helpful to us and make us better servants. First of all, the word Ezekiel, that word means, as a lot of their names in those days had a meaning, it means God strengthens. And that was very appropriate for Ezekiel, because he was a priest and a prophet, and his time was during some of the darkest time for the children of Israel, for the kingdom of Judah. It was during the time they were in captivity in Babylon. Some of his contemporaries, a couple of other prophets that we read about in there. Daniel was also there at that same time that we talked about last week. The difference is Daniel was with the king, living up with the in the court and helping advise him, and Ezekiel was with the common people. He was kind of out in the field doing the dirty work, I guess you would say. Also, Jeremiah was back still in kind of overlap there some. He was still back in Judah at that time, but Ezekiel's one of the major prophets. He's probably one of the longer books we see. It's about 48 chapters in Ezekiel, so there's a lot to read and look at. So obviously we're not going to go through it verse by verse like we have some of the shorter ones, but we will try to hit on some of the things that he talked about, like we said, and how it applied to us. He began his ministry in the 5th year of his captivity. He was taken away. Now we said before when they came that there was 3 deportations, I guess you would call it, of the Israelites when people came and took them away, and he was in that second one, and Daniel was in the first, I believe, and he was in the second, but it was before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which that's an important part that we'll touch on some tonight, a little bit about that. But it's about 8 years before the final destruction of the temple, and he was around the age of 30, we're told. He continued his work there as a prophet for a period of about 22 years, and so he was, like I said, at a time when his name, the God Strengthens, was very important, because the Israelites were in a dark day when they were wondering whether or not this was all going to work out or not, because it was not looking very good. They were been taken away in captivity. Some were still left back in home, but most of them had been carried away or killed during the wars during that time. So part of what he was there to do is that there were false prophets among the Hebrews in Palestine, and also there were some there in Babylon. And we kind of think of that sometimes today. So we have false prophets. Well, they've been around for a long time. False prophets there, their thing was they were kind of sugarcoating the situation, and a lot of them were telling the Israelites, "Oh, it's not going to be bad. Hey, we're going to be back." But that was not God's plan. They were saying, this 70 years that Jeremiah's talking about, that's not going to happen. He said, a couple of years. We'll be through this Babylonian, this little unpleasant situation we're in now, and we'll be back, return to our homeland, everything will be like it was before. But if you remember the purpose, the reason they were there was God's punishment, because they had rejected him, and they'd been not humbled themselves and served him as they should. So they had to go through a time here of learning their lesson a little bit. So he basically had point of that, just as a side, does that remind you of everything? Kind of like Satan in the garden. Oh, it's not that bad, God's not really going to do that. You're not really going to be death, It's all right. So that's kind of the same message they were saying, trying to lead them away and soften it. But Ezekiel basically had about four tasks that he was charged with here by God, if we want to kind of summarize it. But the first one was to renounce these false prophets that was giving this hope of an early return, and also to prophesy about the fall of Jerusalem. We see it happened just a few years after they were carried away, the final destruction took place. We read all this in the first few chapters there. We said there's about 45 or 48 chapters. 45, did I say? Yeah. And the first 1 through 24 of these was written before that event. Also, show here that Jehovah was going to visit the judgment on the people just as he had said he would, and that's talked about in chapters 25 through 32. Also, to preview the return of the Hebrews from captivity, so there was some good news. And number 4, to reveal the ultimate blessings that would follow to those who would follow the leadership. And he started talking about the Messiah, who would come out of this David's lineage here. Talks about that in chapter 33 and verse 15. But we can basically break his prophecies, and he had a lot of them, up into 2 historical parts. The first one was before the fall of Jerusalem, we said a while ago, verse 32, and then after the fall, and that's in chapters 33 through 48. So it helps when you got a big book like this. Can we break it up? Can we kind of see what it is as an overview before we start attacking it? They say the best way to eat elephants one bite at a time, but you kind of got to plot out and get your strategy there about where you're going to start at. If we outlined it in outline form, if we put it on the board, and we do that in 4 parts, but the first part would be the commission of Ezekiel, where he talks about who he is and what God told him to do. Part 2 would be the judgment on Judah. Part 3 would be the judgment on the Gentiles. What's he going to do to them? And the last one would be the restoration of Israel. So he ends it with some good news. When we said it was a dark time, they had been taken away, and said they had these false prophets that were saying, oh, it's not going to last that long. We'll be back before long. But then the news hit them about the destruction of Jerusalem. When that word came back to the ones who had been carried away into captivity, that not only had the rest of them fell, but that Jerusalem had been destroyed, not just defeated, but the city had been destroyed, walls knocked down, and worst of all to the Jews was that holy temple that Solomon had built was no more. They had took all the stuff out of it. They had burned it. I mean, it was the city of Jerusalem. It was not there anymore. So it was that was crushing to them. So they were, as a people, they were deeply depressed. We thought this was going to be with us. We're God's chosen people. This is a temporary thing. We're going to be back. And he said, no, not going to be that easy. So was there hope for them after all? And the answer to that was yes. So part of Ezekiel's task we said a while ago was to give them a message of hope. But that hope was grounded, of course, upon their repentance, just like us today. We're told it can be bad. There's a hell out there. As much as some people don't want to believe that, they want to believe there's a heaven, but they really don't want to believe there's a hell. It is. It's a reality. But, we have, just like he was giving them hope, we have hope. But that hope is based on us listening to God, on us repenting from turning from the ways we've done and living the life he's asked us to or directed us to. Kind of build on that hope. Chapter 34, as he starts that hopeful part of it, it's remarkable in it. It's important if you look at it because there's a series of promises from God, divine promises, that all start with the phrase, I will. Got a couple of teachers in here, people have been in education, but I'll tell you this thing before we start with the I will sentence, or I can. This is what we're going to do. When we're through with this lesson, I will be able to do a multi-step equation or math or whatever. I'm not a math teacher, so I don't know where that came to my mind, but that's one of them, But so he gave them some I will things. This is things that he promised and he will do. In verse 11, he said he would search and seek them out. So they're not going to leave them there all alone with no hope. He would deliver them in verse 12. I will bring them out, verse 13. I will gather them unto myself, verse 13. I will feed them. I will cause them to lie down. I will bind up the broken. I will strengthen the sick. Verse 16, both of those. And also in verse 16, I will destroy the enemy. Verse 17 through 22, I will judge my sheep's differences. Verse 23, I will watch over them. Verse 24, I will be their God. 25 and 26, I will bless them. I will cause them to dwell in safety, verse 25b, or second part of that one. I will make them a blessing, and I will abundantly satisfy them in verses 29 and 31. So in the midst of all the bad things, he's telling them, this is things I'm going to do for you. You know, if you'll listen to me, if you'll do what I ask you to do, and turn back to me, repent, turn away from your hard-heartedness, from worshiping the idols and those kind of things, and refresh your memory a little bit. You know, it got to the point where God said that his people was not just being like the ones around them, they were worse. They were doing awful things. One of those things that we mentioned recently was one of the gods that they were worshiping was that they were even doing child sacrifice. They were sacrificing their own children on this altar, or this metal god, I think, had its arms stretched out. Maybe I've read somewhere, and that thing would be hot and on fire, and they would place the baby right on that. I mean, that's hard to believe that anybody would go to a point that was that bad, but they were there, you know. So he said, you're going to have to do some changing, but if you do, then this is where we're going to be back to. So let's look at some important lessons, and we'll get back to some of those things here in a minute. But let's look at some important lessons that we can learn from this situation. You know, and the situation being is that God has been warning them for years. The northern 10 tribes have been gone for over 100 years, and then finally the southern tribe suffers the same fate. They're defeated and carried away into captivity in three different times. First wave, second wave, and then the last wave when they completely destroyed the temple and the city. But note that God does not shield his people from all hardships, okay? There's a lot of people out there today, false teachers in our day, who will tell you that, oh, if you'll turn to God, everything's going to be rosy for you. You know, there's an old country song several years ago, I beg your pardon, never promised you a rose garden. Some of y'all may remember that one, okay? That's how God, he didn't promise there would be a rose garden. He gave us a garden to begin with. We didn't do very well with that, so we lost it, okay? But God's never promised us he's going to shield us from all hardships. That's not what our human existence is all about. You know, we're sojourners, pilgrims, wanderers here. This is not our home. And if it's too comfortable, we don't want to leave, you know. But it should be to a point where, you know, we're looking forward to what's coming next. I heard it's a funny story. I don't think it was true, but it makes the point. But that a preacher was preaching one night and he said, you know, everybody that wants to go to heaven, you know, stand up. So everybody stood up, but this one guy sitting over there, and he was looking around. He thought, maybe he didn't hear me. He said, I said, everybody who wants to go to heaven, stand up. I said, the guy still didn't stand up. He said, sir, did you hear what I said? He said, everybody wants to go to heaven, stand up. He said, when you die, don't you want to go to heaven? He said, oh, yeah, I thought you was getting up a trip right now. You know, he said, so he was perfectly happy where he was at. Everything was going good, you know. But I think sometimes we get to that point where we're fine where we're at. Just don't bother me, you know. A lot of people get all bent out of shape about the end of days, you know, about the second coming of Christ, the apocalypse, and all these things. And a lot of religious groups really play on people's emotions to try to get them stirred up over how that's going to be. For the Christian, that's not a bad thing. That's the day we're looking for. You know, that should not be a day of dread. That should be a day of victory. That's when all this bad stuff is over with. That's what we've been hoping for, okay? So the hardships, that's part of life, you know. Our earthly domain here, it's an environment of suffering. That's what it is. You know, we're told that from when they kicked out of the garden. You're going to sweat of your brow. You're going to be thorns in your path as you're trying to raise a garden and your crops, you know. And that doesn't just apply if you're a farmer making a living. That applies to whatever your chosen path is that you do. I don't know about y'all, but every job I've ever had problems, okay? I've enjoyed some of them more than others, but all of them had its good and bad points, you know. Probably one of the hardest jobs I ever had physically was a fun job because of the people that we worked with and things we did. When I was going into my senior year of high school, my dad, he got me a job at the sawmill. I appreciate that, you know, stacking lumber, and it was a tough job. And to start out, they had you ever saw how a sawmill works, but the lumber's sawed and it comes off on kind of like a conveyor belt, the chain they call it, and the smaller stuff, 1 inch, 2 inch, 4 inch, 6 inch, 8 inch, and they had a shed over that, kind of a porch-like thing, except at the end where the big stuff came off, the 6x8s, they didn't have a porch. That was out in the sun. Well, guess where I was? I was on the end, catching cross ties, and as they came off and stacking them and binding them up and getting them out. So the first 3 or 4 days of work, I came home and stumbled in the door and just laid down until Mother said supper was ready. Then I went to bed, and that was it, But I got used to it, and it got better. And but the physical part of that was tough, but the camaraderie and the people we worked with made it a good time, So we enjoyed the hard work that we did. But it was tough, But some other jobs you may have, and you may have an office job, you may sit behind a desk, but some of the people you deal with or the problems you deal with, that physically, that tired is, to me, was better than that mentally tired. When you're mentally wore out, stuff you've dealt with all day long, it's hard to come home and rest for that. It's really good to get out and sweat a little and do a little physical work. And I've having retired a week or so ago, and I've been getting out and doing some things, and it feels good to get out and work in the yard and do some things and not have to worry about all that other stuff. I'll be honest with you. So those are some of the parts that God said this life's not going to be rosy. There's going to be problems for all that. That introduction of sin, though, that was done. We're all paying for that. We're told that would happen. In Exodus 20:5, he says, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children to the 3rd and 4th generation, that those that hate me. Now, God doesn't do that to us anymore. We don't pay for our parents' sins, but at that time they did. Also, there we talked about in says that by one man's sin entered into the world, death by sin, and read my writing. And so death passed upon all men, So that original sin, that where it came from, he said that kind of set the path for all the things that we're enduring today. But we suffer for our own stuff. We do enough bad things on our own. The death that came into the world because of sin, that's there. But we suffer for our own things. We all do enough of our own that we deserve the things that we get sometimes, much as we don't want to believe that. But that's the nature of the cause and effect world that we live in. Only heaven has that spiritual atmosphere where problems will not exist. We read about that Revelations 21:1-5. But we're not there yet. But we hope to be. So that's kind of the thing God holds out there for us. This world's going to have its problems, but this is not your home. You're getting through. I mentioned this the other night, something in here, and I think it was in this class when I did it. But the point that I heard recently is, when we're trying to do the best we can and still things happen bad, seem to be bad to us, and we look around at others who are living in sin, like the book, song in our songbook, but farther along we'll know all about it. But that song, others are living around us who are doing sin. They seem to have everything, But the point of that is that if we remember this, that's the closest to heaven those people are ever going to get, is these earthly things they're enjoying. And whatever persecution or problems we have, that's as closest to hell the Christian's ever going to have. So whatever happens to you here, we can endure that for a short time. That summer job working out there doing what I was doing, I knew that wasn't going to last all summer. And I was debating about what my future was going to be, and my dad made sure that I understood what really hard work was like, and not to say we didn't work around the house and do things, but I knew right quick that I didn't want to work at a sawmill stacking lumber the rest of my life. I think I need to go to college after this year. And most summers I didn't work. I didn't go to school most summers. I had a job like that in the summers that made me ready to go back to school in the fall, because especially, I've been in education for a long time, but I really didn't enjoy college. I'll just be honest with you. It was pretty tough. But by the time the time May got there, I was sick of school and I was ready to do something else. By the time August came back and I'd done something else, I was ready to go back to school. So it's a short time you see that, and then hey, I'm ready to get back at it. And so that's how God He made it for us. We suffer those things for a reason. Secondly, that was the first point. Second one is that God allows His people to suffer for their own good sometimes. Been said that suffering is the classroom of obedience. What does that mean? Well, even Christ was said that he's through, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. Being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation. So even Jesus, when he was here, he lived through some tough times, but that was for a purpose, to prepare him for that. Military, you go off to basic training, Parris Island. A friend of mine I went to high school with. He was a drill instructor at Parris Island. And I knew him in high school, and I would hate to have been in his training because I knew how he was then. I can imagine what he was like when he was a DI. But a friend of my brother's was a good bit younger than us, but about 8 or 9 years younger than this guy. But he went to Parris Island. He joined the Marines, and that's the guy, we called him Redbone in school. But Redbone was a DI, and I asked him, Mike, said, "Do you have Redbone for a DI?" And he said, "No." He said, "But I saw him," and he said he was always trying to catch me so he could get me in trouble, even though I wasn't his. He said so. But talking to Jimmy, was his real name later, he says, I always wondered, was I tough enough on those guys going through basic training, because I wanted to be sure they were prepared when the real bullets started flying. He said, I was tough on them, sure was. And he said, that's what boot camp's supposed to be. But it's to prepare you for when war comes, that you are prepared for that. And he said, I never wanted to be any guy that came through my platoon or through my company, whatever it was that he was training, that not be prepared when they got out there facing the enemy. So, that's part of it. Even gold, as beautiful and pure as it is, it doesn't start out pure. You have to purify it. And the way you do that is with fire. It has to go through a process. Even scrap gold, they buy old rings, watches, whatever. They have to get the impurities out of those things, because most of those are not pure gold. So they got to get that out to make it back into those bars. And part of that is heat. They put it through a heat process, and depending on what all it's mixed with, and I won't bore you with all the details of how they do that, but basically they heat that up at least to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the minimum. And depending if there's other things in there, even higher than that. Then they can separate that out and scoop off the bad part, separate out. Also, they do a few other chemical processes, but all that to get it down to the pure. So in order for us to be prepared, we have to go through some suffering, that refining process. So if we are wise enough to learn lessons from that, then there's home prepared for us in heaven. So, like I said to begin with, the country song didn't promise us a rose garden. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. But it's temporary, and it's preparing us for what's ahead. And I was talking to somebody about this recently. A friend of mine with me was eating lunch today, but about some of the things, but the things that we go through makes us stronger. But a lot of times it allows us, if nothing else, it allows us when somebody else goes through that same thing, we can empathize with them. We can help them through that. And I was made the point about losing my dad. And my dad was killed when I was young, when I was in college. And that was a terrible blow to our family because just of the strong father figure he was to everybody. But I've had students then through the years who've went through that, and I could help them through that because I had been through that, where if I hadn't, I would not be able to do that. So the things that we go through, God has a plan for it. And if we'll trust in Him, we'll get there. Third, and is nonetheless the case that the Creator promises to sustain us if we will demonstrate our confidence in Him. If we trust Him, if we obey Him, again, the songbook, trust and obey. There's no other way. So if we trust Him and obey Him, then lean on Him through the hard times, we get through those struggles. And He's never going to put anything on us that we can't make it through. And He's always going to be there to help us. Sometimes we think this is too much, but just look at last week's lesson about Daniel. Daniel went through a lot. The majority of what we read about him was while he was in captivity. And even though he trusted in God and did all that, he still lived his life as a captive the whole time. When he first got there, he was tempted right away. They put pressure on him. Hey, you've got to be like everybody else. You've got to eat the king's food, drink the king's wine. But he stood up. He said, "No, I'm not going to do that." We're going to eat according to our Jewish traditions and laws. We're going to follow those. And so he stuck to that. That was a tough time as a young person, about 16, 17 years old, to be faced with that. And then later, when he was interpreting the dreams, the first one, if you remember a lesson last week, the king had told you wise men can't tell me my dream. I'm not going to tell you what the dream was. You got to tell me what the dream was and interpret it. And if you can't, then you're not really one of my wise men. You're a fake, so I'm going to have you killed. And Daniel said, prayed to God, hey, I'm about to face death here again. Help me out. And he did. He interpreted the dream, told him what the dream was, and let him interpret it, which led him to a high place. And then also the last story we learned about him was in the lion's den. Again, it set a trap to and we kind of had to rush through that in last week, so it was good to kind of go back and recap a little. But he was, when Nebuchadnezzar was defeated by the Medes and the Persians and Darius took over, he still had a high place even in that government. And the people who didn't like him, the other governors over the regions, so they said the only way that we're going to be able to get Daniel, he's too good a person, the only way we can trip him up is by catching him doing what he's supposed to do, what he believes he's supposed to do, which was pray every day. So they had the king pass a law that if anybody prays to anybody besides the king or bows down to anybody besides the king, you'll get thrown in the lion's den, because they knew he was going to do it. Now, what kind of a testament is that to his character, that they knew we're not going to be able to get him doing anything bad? Think about politicians today. They're constantly under a microscope trying to find something you've done bad your enemies are, but we're all human, and that's not too hard to do most of the time. But him, they knew the only way they could trip him up was to catch him doing what he was supposed to do. They said it through his God. So sure enough, he did it, but he trusted he did it anyway. He didn't go behind the woodshed to pray. He got out there and opened up the windows and prayed so everybody could see him, because that's what he always did. It's what he was supposed to do. So Daniel trusted during those bad times. And for us, how do we do that? Do we trust during the bad times? Myself, I have a lot of weaknesses, but one that I struggle with the most probably is worry. And why worry? Because we're told God's going to take care of everything, but I still will worry at times. And then he always has made it work out, though. He always said he would if you trust in him. And we mentioned this in our Sunday night lesson the other night, is talking about what were we talking about? I can't remember now what our topic was, but anyway, our verse was Romans 8:28, and that that God, all things work together for good to those who trust in Him. So that was providence. That's what we were talking about, is that God does that through providence. But it's all going to work out. It may not be good at the time, but at the end, it's all going to work out, which is a great lesson from the story of Ezekiel. It was not good. They were 70 years in captivity, but at the end, he told him all those I will statements. If you do what I tell you to, and if you repent and turn back, at the end, all this is going to work out, and the best is going to come back. Talking about boot camp, everybody doesn't make it through boot camp. Some of them wash out, especially if you're going up a little higher. When you go to the Ranger School, or to the if you go to be a Navy SEAL. I've got a cousin who he was in the Navy. He when he was a little kid, since he was tiny, always wanted to be in the military. He had an uncle who was in the military, and he idolized him. I always wanted to be in the military. And when he got a little older, he said, I want to be a Navy SEAL. Well, that's a tall order, if you know anything about the SEALs. So he got in the Navy. His dad wouldn't let him join. He made him go to college first, so he went and majored in geography. He said, because I want to know the world, because I'm going to go see it. So he did. And the day he graduated, he joined the Navy. But went to that twice, and both times he flunked out. He didn't make it. The cold water training he had to do, I think that both times he got sick or whatever, and he didn't make it through that part of it. But it's tough. So everybody doesn't make it through there, but the ones who do are the best. If you remember Tom Cruise in the movie Top Gun, the best of the best. So that's the Christian. That's the best of the best. The ones who have survived, make it through, trust God, whatever trials come up, then we make it through that, and that's who's going to be in heaven, is the best of the best. So that should give us some hope there to live by. Also, is that we go through all those things, that we'll win in the end. Everybody loves a comeback story or a happy ending to a movie. And that's the story of the Bible, is that the good guys win. That's what makes it a good story, nothing else. So Ezekiel was an ancient prophet, like we said. Also provide us with some instruction and consolation in that regard. So principles that we learn from him, and that's what the Old Testament's for, we see, is to teach us principles, Romans 15:4. But helps us to appreciate and profit from those men of God and the things that they went through. So 2 or 3 things I had mentioned here we'd talk about tonight before we run out of time. But Ezekiel was warned that Israel would not always want to receive his messages. In chapter 3 and verse 7 of Ezekiel, God told him, this people, they're rebellious people. That's why they're here. He gave him a tough job. You're not speaking to an easy crowd. This is people they've turned their back on me, and that's why they're here. But I want you to go to them. And your task is not going to be easy. It's not going to be comfortable. It's a hard job. But he also promised that he was going to equip him, be with him, and strengthen him. He says, behold, I have made your face strong against their face, and your forehead strong against their forehead. 3 and 8. So basically he's telling them, he said, you're going to have to get in their face. Face is strong. You're going to butt heads with them. Your forehead's stronger than their forehead. If you see 2 goats out there in the pasture, 2 of these big ram when they hit them. How do they do that, without knocking themselves out? But he said, I've made that strong. You're going to be able to butt heads with them, and you're going to come out on top because I've prepared you for that. So many times we feel that God has given us more than we're able to do. You ever felt like that? You ever felt like, man, this is too much, Maybe you lost a loved one or something like that, and you think, I can't deal with it. I can't bear it. But we can. He's given us what we need to be able to do that. He's also promised that he'll give us what we need, what's required. Philippians 4:13. That's a verse you see. A lot of people have that on their T-shirt in their weight room, whatever, and all things through Christ who strengthens me. So that's some people's favorite verse. But he says, hey, that's true. It's true. I'll be with you. Ezekiel was also given a book and told to eat it. And if you've never read Ezekiel, read that part of it. Okay, that's kind of weird. Kind of sounds strange. He says, I'm going to give you this book, and what I want you to do with it is eat it. All right, and it's in chapter 2, verse 9 and 3:3. He said, the book's going to be sweet to the taste. It's going to be like honey. It's written on the inside and the outside with lamentations and mournings. After he had filled his belly with these things, God again directed him, Son of man, go to the house of Israel and speak with my words to them. So obviously that's symbolism. He didn't actually tell him to eat a book. But what he meant by that was, these are my words. These are the things that I could do. You've got to take them into you, and you've got to digest them. Okay? Does that sound familiar? We got a book, right? We're supposed to digest it. We're supposed to eat it. Okay? Some of us are starving. Okay? Have you had your daily dose of that? Okay? I like to eat, and I do that on a regular basis. So, do I study on a regular basis? Okay? I feed my body. Do I feed my soul and my spirit? That's just as important. That's more important, really, because if eventually this body's going to die anyway, no matter what you do for it. But the soul, the stronger it is, that spirit, the more it's going to be. So he told him the symbolism of that is, before you can give this message to others, first you got to take it into yourself. So he was there in this land too. He could have been discouraged just like everybody else could. But he told him, he says, you got to take this, apply it to yourself, and then go teach it to other people. Again, that's just what we're told to do today. We're to take God's word. We're to study it. We're to eat it. We're to digest it. Let it become a part of us so that we can show it to and teach other people from that. A lot of times our final prayer, mine usually is at the end of class. We take what we've learned tonight, apply it to ourselves, become better Christians, teach it to somebody else. So you can't give a message to somebody unless you've received it and applied it. If you're not, it's just God's words, just words on a paper. You've heard those saying, I'd rather see a sermon any day as hear one. That's very true. We have to take that into ourselves, So people will listen, but they've also got to see you practicing what you preach, or it's not going to have much effect on what you're doing. So our first thing we got to do is be sure we're right, and then go from there. All right. So we must act on its truths ourselves, and then we share it with others. If we fail to do so, we're guilty with them of their sins. Every believer is a watchman. So turn to Ezekiel. We hadn't really read much out of Ezekiel tonight. We're almost through the lesson, but turn to Ezekiel chapter 3. And let's look at verses 14 through 21. Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 14 through 21. It says, "And so the Spirit lifted me up and took me away, and I went in bitterness in the heat of my spirit, but the hand of the Lord was strong on me. Then I came them of the captivity of Tabla that dwelt by the river Chebar, and I sat where they sat, and remained there astonished among them 7 days." So for 7 days he didn't say a word. "And it came to pass at the end of 7 days that the word of the Lord came upon me, saying, Son of man, I have made thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore hear the word at my mouth, and give them warning from me. When I say unto the wicked, Thou shalt surely die, and thou givest him not the warning, nor speakest to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand. Yet if thou warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul." Okay? So, another song from our songbook, one of those songs. "You Never Mention Him to Me." You remember that one? Okay. How sad it'd be to be at judgment and see somebody that we could have taught and didn't. How sad would that be? But that's what I tell him here. He says, your part is to deliver the message. He says, if you deliver the message and they don't listen, then that's on them. That's not on you. He says, but if you don't deliver this message I'm giving you, remember he told them they're not going to like it. It's not going to be popular. He said, but if you don't deliver the message to them and then they don't change, now it's your fault. It's on you. So the same thing applies to us as Christians. People we run into every day, the people we associate with, it's our job to plant the seed. It says God will do the watering, okay? And just like the parable about the different types of soil that seed's going to fall on, some of it's going to take root and some of it's not. Some of it's going to fall on that wayside and that rocky soil, and it's never going to take root. That's the soil's part. That's not the farmer that puts it out there. Some, it'll take a root for a little while, and then it won't be deep enough, and they'll give up on it. Again, that's on them, not on you. But then the ones who you do have success with, then that's the ones that you do. And even if you do something and you're successful, that's great. But in the end, even if they don't listen, you've done your part. And think about who was we telling the Bible about preached for 100 years and got zero response. While Noah was building the ark, he tried to get people to listen, which it was a pretty crazy story if you think about it. Telling them it was going to rain. It never rained before. They said, it's going to flood. They said, you're crazy. You're building that big old boat for what? It's on dry land. And they didn't listen, okay? But he had done his job, okay? If they don't listen, that's their fault. So with us, and I have been guilty of this, and I'm still guilty of it from time to time, but sometimes I may not share with somebody because I don't think they'll listen. Well, that's not my job to determine who gets to hear it. That's between them and God. It's our job just to tell them, okay? And it's not always easy, So we looked at this. How does this relate what Ezekiel was doing to us? And that's why I picked this part to read, because this applies to us very strongly every day. Are we planting the seed? Are we giving them that option? You remember back when we studied about Nahum, we went back and talked about Jonah. Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh and preach. For one, he didn't like those people. And number two, he didn't think they would listen. That was the most wicked, terrible people on the earth at that time. He didn't want to go, but they repented. And for about 100 years, they lived it pretty good. So that was God. That was a God thing. That was not anything that he did great. But what he's telling him here, this same thing applies to us today. We are watchmen just like he is, and our job is to spread the good news. And hopefully somebody will listen. And sometimes it may take a long time. A great example of that in my own family, my grandmother's sister, Sister Ethel, Ike, her husband Ethel, they moved from down where we were years and years ago. They moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, back right after World War II, and he worked in the government stuff up there that they got going on in Oak Ridge. And my aunt, and they had 3 children, and she went to church, carried them. My uncle never would go. I loved them. They were great people. That was our favorite vacation was not going to the beach or to the mountains, although they lived in the edge of the mountains. But we would go to their house and stay for several days. But it was country boys' delight there. I mean, they lived right on the river. Their front yard dropped off in the river, and they had a boat and a dock, and they raised horses and hunted. And he had dogs and dog trader. I mean, it was a lot of fun when you were there with them for the summer. But he'd never not go. And kids were grown up and gone, and my Uncle Ethel, great Uncle Ethel, was in his late 70s, approaching 80. And one morning, Sunday morning, like she always did, she was getting up, getting ready to go to church. And she turned around, and he was getting ready. She said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm going to church with him." And he finally went and was baptized and became a Christian. And within less than a year, he passed away. So you never know by the example that you live and being persistent that it may pay off someday, and somebody you may have give up on because she was keeping on doing her thing, but I really don't think she believed he was ever going to listen. I know the rest of the family didn't, but he did, and it finally worked. So you never know what influence you'll have on somebody, and it may just be because you keep on doing it, and it may not be anything great that you do or some big thing, but just the fact that you keep on every day getting up and going to work. That's some of those soft skills we talk about teaching their kids these days. Is just get up and go to work every day. Okay, just be there. So as Christians, that's our job: just to be a watchman, to present the word to them whether they like it or not, and let God do it from there. Take it from there. Okay. All right. I think our time is about up. Enjoyed sharing a lesson with you tonight. Hopefully, something I said you can take and, like we said, apply it to you, and hopefully make you want to study a little bit more. Like I said, the book of Ezekiel is a long one, and if you just start reading it from the front, it's may get the best of you. So if you got a plan, if you got an outline, and kind of understand about what it's all about to begin with, kind of help you as you go through and make some sense out of it. But it has some great lessons in there to what was going on in that day, and then also apply some great things to us as Christians today. If you will, bow with me, and we'll end with a prayer. Father, we thank you for the day. We thank you for the rain and the sunshine, for all the many blessings that you bless us with, for our health, for jobs, to be earning a livelihood. Thank you for bringing us here together tonight to study and really preach thy word. Pray, Father, should be the ones who are here. Pray that the things here would fall on good ground, and that they would consider those things that have been discussed tonight, and they would make them stronger servants to thine. Father, the ones who are not here, the ones who are not able to be, pray it should be with Ben as he's away traveling. Pray that the lesson he gives there tonight in Tupelo would be effective and would be bring forth fruit. Give him a safe passage back to us. Father, be the ones who are not with us tonight because of sickness, that you'd be with them, and the ones who are serving them, tending to them, that the things they're doing will be in accordance with thy will, that they'll be back with us soon. Father, especially be with those who have chosen not to be here tonight. Pray that they would look to thee, and maybe even if they're not being receptive at this time, and in time, if we would continue to work and be patient and continue to teach them and show them by example of how Christians should be, that will eventually work. Father, be with us all, forgive us our sins, and finally save us in our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.